everything comes down to people. Sounds so cheesy, but in the end, probably 95 of problems that I encounter in my day to day is like because someone has some emotions or some things going on that others don't know about. I love people. I think it's so amazing how complex and there is no logic to most people and how they think and how they process stuff. I love that complexity. Being outside of your comfort zone is clearly what makes you grow a lot. Talent is super, super important. We're growing very fast. I think that only last quarter we hired about 250 new colleagues. I've never met anyone within Factorial who is like a slacker.
We are live on the Objective Hiring Show. Today we're joined by Laura. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Hi, Tim. Very happy to be here.
It is our pleasure to have you here. And where I always like to start with guests is just to hear a little bit about Laura. Who are we speaking to today? Where are you joining us from in the world?
All right. I'm joining you from sunny London, rare occurrence. And I am technically German, as you may hear from my accent. I'm the Director of Strategy and Partnerships at Factorial HR, a Spanish unicorn in the HR tech space. Right now, we're actually expanding more into the business management side of things, so not purely linked to HR. But given that we're speaking about objective hiring today, I think our HR capabilities, specifically, especially on the ATS stuff, comes handy here. I lead a team of 8 at Factorial. We're building out strategic partnerships. Who would have thought? And very interesting for me to come from it from a lens that doesn't necessarily touch on where I work, right? But for me as a manager, or both, who knows? But hiring is something that's super dear to my heart, given that my firm belief is everything comes down to people. Sounds so cheesy, but in the end, probably 95 of problems that I encounter in my day to day, be it at work or be it like outside, is like because someone has some emotions or some, I don't know, things going on that others don't know about. And if you don't convince and persuade that person to do what you want them to do or to change their beliefs or whatever, you run into things that are so unpredictable and not rational at all. I find that fascinating.
Is that almost a endorsement for the AI to take over more then, in a sense, because it's not going to be as emotional and irrational, or is it trained on our data, so it's just going to be like us?
In regard of hiring or just in general?
In general.
I think I'd approach it from a different point of view. I think when you would ask me, do you love or do you hate people then? I think it's both at the same time. I love people. I think it's so amazing how complex and so there is no logic to most people and how they think and how they process stuff and whatever. I love that complexity. On the other hand, it's also so tough to deal with sometimes, right? And I think everyone can relate to when you just like, I just don't understand that person. And we always tend to think for ourselves what we believe is true and how the modus operandi on which everyone runs on. And I think that's the biggest misconception that exists in the world. And I think there is where our AI can help us probably somehow mitigate our own biases and open up our, I don't know, what is that? Our nosiness, our curiosity about others, and challenge our own beliefs here, which will hopefully at some point makes it easier to understand other people, even though they're really, really different to ourselves.
Yes. One thing I remember doing years ago at a company I worked at was the HBDI framework. It's like the communication preferences, where it's got the 4 colors. Red is emotional, blue is logical. It's like yellow and green is creativity and planning or something like that. And I remember we did this in our business, and it was very clear the people who I clashed with and who I got on with were just more like me. Surprise, surprise. And those that were like off the chart red, which is emotional, and very low logical, were the ones I couldn't deal with. And they probably couldn't deal with me, by the way, just to be clear.
Absolutely, and I think that's the best known bias out there, right? Similarity bias, mini-me bias. That's the people that we get most along with. I'm absolutely fascinated by the topic because even though you're aware that you have that bias, everyone has that bias. We're in most cases unable to overcome it, at least in the moment in the emotionally charged situation that you find a conflict in or whatever. But it's interesting you say that. I'm not familiar with that concept, but in a previous life, I worked for McKinsey, and I remember that we were always doing the Myers-Briggs assessment there. Mostly when we were like kicking off projects, right? And when you want to discuss like team dynamics beforehand. And although McKinsey, very logical organization, absolutely acknowledged that this is not a scientific, psychologically, I don't know, renowned measure whatever, like tool to use. I always found it very, very helpful. And it is established at this organization as something to, framework your emotions, your operating system in a sense, and then measuring just the way on how you think, how you like to communicate, how you solve problems, etc. And I think this sense, regardless of the framework of bringing order to complex topics, which we all are, right? Like our complex systems, and to decipher that are hugely helpful.
Do you remember your Myers-Briggs personality type?
Yes, because I was absolutely obsessed with it because it always changed.
Oh, well, that's not meant to happen.
Yeah. It's not meant to happen, but I think it's also contextual, right? I firmly believe that the people that we surround ourselves with bring some facets of our personality out, better or worse, or like enhance them. I think when I was at McKinsey in an analyst role, associate role, it was mostly ESTJ. So whatever that means, we could probably break it down letter by letter. But then when I was outside of McKinsey and then ventured out into corporate world, it turned into STN. What's the other thing? STN, not JP. Or back to J, and the N would change to the other letter that I don't remember. Anyhow, and then you could debate on the accuracy of these, but some things are definitely clear. I'm an E, very much extrovert. But even that, right? Even that definition is controversial in some sense because people don't really know what does it mean to be an extrovert, or what it means something else for everyone. And for me, that means I need to recharge with close circle, loved ones, instead of, I enjoy being out in public. I don't have an issue with like speaking, public speaking, whatever. I mean, I work in partnerships. Would be an issue if that would be the case, right? But it also like drains my energy if I do it too much. And therefore, I'm not as much an extrovert as people would probably think when they first see me.
Interesting. In regards to personality, do you think that you should try to find a job that matches your personality because you're going to be better at it because it's easier for you? You're good at things other people might find difficult? Or is there a sense of deliberately stressing yourself and going, well, you know what? I'm pretty introverted. I'm going to give myself an extroverted job because then I'm going to learn something. How do you think about it?
I guess it probably depends on what you're seeking. And that probably depends on the moment in your life or the career path that you're trying to go down. That depends is a very consultant question, is it, or answer, but is that? I think that there's definitely value in finding a job that aligns with your core values and what you believe in, or like an environment, a company, and that has like a good overlap in that, because if that's not the case, you wouldn't feel welcomed or welcome, or I don't know, identify yourself with that company role environment. But on the other hand, like being outside of your comfort zone is clearly what makes you grow a lot, right? So it depends whether you just want to chill out a little bit over there and you take the role that is absolutely aligned with your capabilities, with your CV, with your personality, same thing. But if you are looking for the hyper growth internally, I think challenging yourself actively is the way to go. And that's what I would also recommend, right? Again, another bias where studies suggest that men go for roles where they're more, or like tend to apply for roles that they only, I don't know, I don't have the concrete number, but align to, you will know much better, align to I don't know how many % of the requirements. One. If women don't think they are like overqualified for the job, they're less likely to apply. So that's definitely a different aspect to look at here, and a bit of a bias that women can work with, knowing that to push themselves out more to go after jobs that might be a bit of a reach. Same goes for men. Don't apply to jobs that you're absolutely unqualified for. You're wasting my time. However, if it's a stretch, come back and let's talk about it. Always keen for people in my team who, are hungry, want to challenge themselves, bring the basics, but love to dig in and figure stuff out.
And what was it that attracted you to Factorial in the first place? And how have you found it since you've joined?
That's a great question, because I was not actively looking for a job when I first got in touch with Factorial. Yeah, or got first introduced, you would say. A friend of mine was applying for a role there and then decided to go for something else. But my now boss and the interviewer at the time asked this great question, not only in interviews, but also in his one-on-ones with people that he works with, enjoys working with. Do you know anyone that you think would be a good fit for here? And I think this small and so obvious question is what brought me here, because my friend didn't know anyone. He turned to me to ask me whether I knew anyone, and I was like, hello, you know me? I fit most of the criteria that they were looking for. I don't know, whatever. I was like, yeah, well, what about me? And he introduced me. And I was speaking to Marcel, our VP of strategic partnerships, so my boss, for a good year. We were not really following a structured interview process. We were getting to know each other, discussing the challenge, which is really, really cool, building out a new go-to-market channel, basically from scratch. And we're basically problem solving for a while. He decided to go for a different approach to building that team, not an external hire in the first place. But we kept in touch. And then after like a year or so, he called me and he says, hey, I think I have 2 challenges that might be of interest for you. Want to like chat more in detail and more concretely about this possibility? And I think this approach of like just maintaining that human connection, and because we liked each other, maybe a little bit of a bias there, right? And that nurturing, like kind of as in a sales process of like, hey, I like this person, I see potential, I think that would be a good fit. It's not the moment right now, but in the future, was something that I don't think I've ever experienced before. Well, yes, technically, yes. Of course, headhunters do that all the time and whatnot, but like not in such a genuine way, which I think speaks to the caliber and the importance of human relationships for that function, but Factorial as a whole. And then it's just, I mean, the challenge itself, the role that the challenge that my team and I are solving right now is really, really cool. And the ambition of Factorial, we're a unicorn, but we obviously don't want to stop there, but grow much further, conquer many more markets, make many more customers very, very happy, digitize them, which is a need, I think, if we're all threatened by being overtaken by AI soon anyhow. And that's reflected across the organization. Talent is super, super important. We're growing very fast. I think that only last quarter we hired about 250 new colleagues. And that's so cool. I've never met anyone within Factorial who is like a slacker, everyone's grinding, and not in the sense of like, we need to like prove ourselves here as an individual basis now, but they believe in the mission, and it's a collective cultural thing where we think that we're doing something really cool.
And is there anything that's struck out to you since you've been there that's a little bit special, a little bit different, something about the culture or the way that it operates that's like, okay, I can see why this is a unicorn, like it's kind of obvious how they've gotten here?
You know what? I was never really a fan of corporate values in the past because I never really saw them reflected in the actual culture that I was experiencing. When you look at Factorial's values, we have 4 values. They're very basic if you look at them at first glance. Yeah? One is ownership. we own it. That's the most important one for me. But it's really lived and breathed across the organization. I know exactly when I throw something over the fence to someone that they will pick it up and they will run with it. It's theirs. We empower people across the organization massively to do their thing. We encourage them to, basically be their own little entrepreneur within this startup, scale up, whatever you want to call it at this stage. And the people embrace it. And I think that only works if from the top people believe in that, and if they enable people to do that. In other organizations that I've worked, that was always walk, but no talk with that regard. And I think, as always, it's leading by example.
And when you say enablement, so that means the person is somehow empowered to get on with it, like, and they're not stopped in any way or blocked, and they have the right tools to help them. How does that enablement work?
I guess it depends on the colleague that you are asking to do things, right? But completely my team, what I usually say is, look, if you have an idea, if you see something that's not working, you have my full permission to go and figure out on how to fix it. If you think that's beyond your immediate reach, tell me, we'll figure it out together. If we're not sure whether that's something that should be top of the agenda right now, let's create a business case that is, of course, revenue is important, right? But also savings or just like strategic positioning, etc. So when someone believes in something in Factorial, there comes another value that I'm going to sprinkle in here. Be convinced, or no, how do we call it actually? That's a terrible example I'm giving. But basically what the essence of it is, if you can't convince the other person, you have to be open to be convinced about something. If you believe in something, convince the rest of the organization. And sometimes in my team, someone says, I really think something is working terribly. I was like, is it really such a big pain? Because for me, it's not. If you truly believe that this is going to change how we operate as an organization and we can actually level up as a whole, show me the numbers, show me the impact, create a little thing that, a little Notion page that brings together all that stuff. And we can discuss it and I'll help you with it. I sit down with people, I say, look, what do you think the impact levers are? That's where my consulting background probably kicks in again. We structure it a little bit, but then it's theirs, right? I won't sit down with them and if I'm not convinced yet, do it for them. I'm going to say, look, based on what you're telling me, this is what I would look at. Go figure out whether you find the data, whether you find other people that support you, and come back and we can discuss. And then they basically go out and pitch to people and come back. Sometimes in the meantime, they think, maybe it's not worth my time that much, it's too much hassle. But then they haven't believed in it thoroughly in the first place. And see, the idea sees itself out. And then when I'm convinced by a proposal that they put together, well, I go and put it through to management. And we fight for that. And as easy as that, everyone knows that, of course, you have to fight for it. There's many things that we want to do. Not everything is going to be prioritized at all times. But this whole thing of, this whole belief of like, if you really believe for something, if you can gather the data, if you can make a compelling case, there's always going to be attention for it. There's always going to be money for it. And you have the support of your managers to, be the one spearheading these efforts. That's really cool.
Yeah, that is. And I can see how that would appeal to an entrepreneurial kind of person who otherwise in a larger company, even middle-sized company, might be quickly disheartened that their initiatives aren't supported in that way. So that's good to hear. You'd mentioned last time we chatted and just now as well, building out a team. And love to hear how that process has gone, what's worked. Did you kind of tweak anything along the way? How's that all working out?
Quite a few things, I'd say. When I joined last May, I was handed over 2 teams who both had a team lead in 2 different regions. Fast forward now, I only lead one of these teams. We've handed over the other team to someone else due to some restructuring and frankly also bandwidth. We figured out quickly that my remit, the DACH region, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, needed a little more attention that I couldn't provide if I was focusing on something else. So the other team has had a few, hiring decisions along the way while I was working with them. But the bigger impact was probably in DACH. Of the 4 people that were in the team when I took over, 1 is left. And I said it earlier, I'm leading 8, so 7 have joined. In between, a few have come in and left again, either because I didn't do a great job hiring or because they were just there for a short stint. I had an amazing intern who reached out to me on LinkedIn, I think in my first or second week, and was very persistent in getting my attention and wanting to interview with me. That didn't even have a position, open for her at the time. Who then ended up joining us because she was very persuasive. She was so good. The entrepreneurial spirit that we touched upon before, she was the embodiment of it, straight out of university. No hard skills in that sense. No offense, Valeria, if you're hearing this, but has had such profound growth within the company due to her, curious nature of like, let me dig in, let me get going, and was leading one of our most strategic integrations at the end of her internship, and that was just planned for a short stint. Hope she's coming back at some point. Here comes the nurturing again. Others who have briefly joined, wasn't the right place for them, decided to leave, or we decided that it wasn't the right place for them. But mostly hiring and building out the other 7 that are now a permanent part of the team. Looking at lots of CVs, having plenty of interviews, and making more or less fast decisions, right? Hiring more. Still this year or this quarter, I should probably bring 4 more people on board. So it's quite speedy.
Exciting times. And I'm wondering, since you've joined, has your philosophy in hiring or people changed at all? Have you kind of adjusted or tweaked anything? And if so, how and why?
I think I lost you for the last part of the question.
If your philosophy has changed on hiring since you've joined, like how has it changed exactly?
I think it has changed in that regard that I'm less afraid of making mistakes in hiring. So I think during the hiring process, you can probably test for 50, 60, 70% of the actual fit. The rest you need to see in action. I thought before doing this role, I thought that this was going to be a little more. Coming from McKinsey, for example, where we have a very structured hiring process, the mishire quota is very, very low. And I believe that this process that they're running there for the environment that the consultancies and professional services industry, for the environment that they're in, works very, very well. In the more chaotic environment that we're right now, as a scale up, as a tech company, I think this percentage has dropped a little bit for me, and I need to figure out whether people are actually up for the challenge on the job. So at the beginning, I was a bit hesitant to go with profiles that I was not 1,020% convinced that they were up for the challenge. But then some of these profiles actually weren't that great. And others who I wasn't that sure about were turning out to be absolute rock stars in the first few weeks. So now I'm like, look, let's try. Let's be transparent also about that with the candidates. Like if someone is overhauling their whole life and like, is not up for a tricky start. That sounds weird, right? But like something where they're like, it's a bet in some extent. And sometimes I just sit down with candidates and like, look, I'm really happy to take the plunge here with you. If you're happy, we cannot guarantee that this is working out because it's very exciting, but I'm being more open about it. And if people are up for it, that's a good sign for me. And we just go and try it out. And in like 9 out of 10 cases, it works.
You mentioned McKinsey and the kind of consulting style of hiring. And they used to call it the McKinsey interview, the 40-hour interview, didn't they? I'm not sure if McKinsey ever actually did that in their hiring practice, but that's what it was labeled. with the idea being that you can't really tell until you actually see someone do the job. So maybe in a week you really do know. Um, have you tried anything like an intermediate step, like some companies would use like a project or something like that, or some kind of work sample? And if so, did that correlate well with job performance?
We do business cases and like send home assessments for some roles, role plays where we let people pitch the product, for example, or set up some partnership conversations. Um, and generally, I see very little correlation with the actual performance on the job based on what they do in that business case and what not. So they can tell me absolute bollocks in terms of content in these take-home assessments and whatever not. What I take out of them is much more how they approach it and methodology, effort, confidence, like softer skills, which is, I think, not the first thing that you would jump to if you hear about a exam question, right, that we're asking. One of the top members of my team right now is no. Let me rephrase that. One of the guys on my team right now, who is an absolute superstar, actually was not hired for the first role he applied to based on the performance in his business case. And then I opened up another position and I was like, hang on. I know this guy already. To be fair, transparency here. He's a friend of mine from university. I'm convinced that he's going to be good in this new role. He sucked, absolutely sucked at the business case we gave him for the first. But he's doing such an amazing job now that, hey, let's go for it, right? What are we supposed to do? Anyhow, I like seeing how people go about it. Just last week, I had a candidate who came to a case study that I've run, I think, 6, 7, 8 times already with other candidates, and was the first one who didn't prepare anything. He didn't bring his laptop. He didn't have a PowerPoint presentation or anything else. And that was at the beginning of the interview. I was like, okay, this can either go very, very well or very, very bad. Guess what? What do you think?
I think he went great.
No, I thought so. And turns out that he couldn't even tell me like the most basic question about the company, like pricing. Yeah, I think he undershot pricing assumptions by like, I don't know, he said €2 when it was like 8 or 10 or something. And it's one of the most prominent things on our website. So it was like, how can you not prepare for these things? Like, it's fair enough. I would have, if you had great performance in this case study or in this role play without PowerPoint presentation, who am I to tell you? Like, I don't care how you do your job. But that you'd come not prepared in the way that you haven't even opened the website once, that's unacceptable.
Did you give them that feedback on the spot, or was it kind of evident from the fact that they were tanking that they knew they'd made a mistake?
I was pissed off during that interview. And it was interesting because it was the first case study that a team lead in my team was running. So she's doing her first steps in hiring, and I was there as a backup, basically. And I was really pissed off, and I didn't want to waste her time. But at the same time, I also didn't want to, make it look like this was absolutely terrible and send her, like, discourage her in the first case study that she was doing. So I tried to take over a little bit and nudge this guy into some sort of, on the spot problem solving, quite a bit consulting style, actually. It was like, so, okay, let's take a step back. Regardless of what we've told you before, regardless of what's in the exercise here, if you were to, and I gave him a little thing, unable to do it. And that obviously frustrated me much more. So we wrapped up the interview quite quickly. I think he noticed that it was going poorly. So then after I convened with the team lead in my team, and I was like, hey, what did you think? We had the exact same observations, of course. And I gave her 2 options. Do you want to deliver that feedback or shall I? And she was like, you know what, go for it. So I gave him a call the next day. And I'm German, so I'm very frank, right? He was German too, so he could take it. But I said, look, I generally you will have noticed on the spot that was not your best performance, probably. We don't think there's a fit for you in our team. If you want, we can discuss a few points here. And look, don't take it personal, but it felt like you didn't want to come to this interview. You didn't want to actually go for this role. If that's the case, just a very friendly recommendation from my side. Don't waste your own time, but more importantly, don't waste the other people's time, because that sucks. Like, if you don't want to be there, why were you coming? And he actually didn't have much to say about that. So interesting. I would love to know what he was actually secretly thinking in his head.
Yeah. I mean, I did see the corporate espionage last week in the US with Deal and the other company, Rippling. So who knows? Maybe he was a spy sent in by someone, and he just did a very, very bad job at getting his foot in the door. Who knows?
Fair assumption.
The world's worst spy. He's no James Bond, that's for sure.
I mean, it's tough, right? You also, like, it's young people, young talent. You don't really know how hard do you want to go on them, how not, like, how soft, how much guidance you need to give them. But the variability in candidates is vast, I feel, and it's tough to see that until you bring them to more advanced stages of conversations. So with the first screening, no chance to actually figuring that out. Many people can fake it very well. So for that reason, we do at least 3 interviews, some shorter, some longer, and 1 applied case, however that might look like. And even then, if I'm not convinced about that being actually worth the plunge, I have another chat. I invite them face to face, and we have another discussion. And I'm being quite open in my feedback, I would say, because I mean, I need to be open with feedback after, when you join the team anyhow. So why not start before that?
Yes, and I think in general that's something sadly lacking in hiring a lot of the time, is kind of open, honest transparency from both sides. I kind of feel like hiring would be a lot better if in that first meeting it was like, here's all my cards, here's all our cards, do they match or not, rather than a lot of the typical like withholding almost of information and the kind of teasing out, which just makes it quite inefficient from my perspective anyway. Including even just simple things like, for a company, like putting the remuneration on a job ad. Like, that's still 90 something percent of jobs don't even have that. But that would seem pretty basic to me. And then candidates as well, being open and honest and just getting everything out. What are their requirements? Like, what do they really need from the role? Maybe some of it's like a reluctance because you don't want to disqualify yourself, or they don't want to disqualify potentially good candidates. So there's a little bit of dancing, but just feel like we should be honest as soon as possible. What do you reckon?
I agree, but I need to reference it for the 5th time. I think I'm German, very direct, and for a German, even more direct. So I love transparency, and it's the worst thing for me if someone, keeps their cards covered and doesn't really show their true motives. But at the same time, it's a great challenge, right? To figure out what are they actually after, what are they actually interested in, and like, yeah, then we're back at the whole, what do people really want? What are they really moved by? It's fascinating. I think, yes, I fully agree with you.
These crazy people, so complex. Is there any way, any like tips you have in that interview, any way you kind of, I guess, help people feel comfortable for one, and then unpack and be real with you?
I think there's 2 ways, right? One is, some you crack by simply asking the question, and not only in interviews, but I have a lot of partner conversations where I'm basically recruiting partners, but I need to basically sell my partnership to them. And many times I simply ask the question, what are you incentivized by? Like, on a actual remuneration point of view, what are your objectives? What are you after? How can I make you successful? And it is stunning to me how many people just give that away when you ask them head on. I learned that from Microsoft, actually, a good partner of ours. And they're like, look, if they're not incentivized on it, they won't do it. And I was like, okay, how do I find out what they're incentivized by? They just asked. I was like, okay, bold move. Let me try. It works sometimes. And if it doesn't work, I think That's the more logical approach. The more emotional one is one that my coach always tell me is like, build trust by sharing experience of yours, some vulnerability, some genuine experience that you've gone through. And I think we all had plenty of hiring experiences on both sides, right? As a recruiter or a hiring manager, as well as a candidate. And I can tell tales from terrible, terrible interview experiences. So that opens up some doors.
Yes, and please go on. Do any spring to mind that you can say without giving away any, I don't know, confidential information?
Sure. I mean, three that come to mind. And one was a McKinsey competitor that I choose to walk away from the interview after round one. Many people would have said, "Oh my God, I made it to round two. I need to go after that. There's such a big brand, whatnot." I just didn't feel comfortable in the first round, in the first interview. By the way, the interviewer treated me, like they were really grilling me, but not in a nice way, and like really trying to make me feel uncomfortable and getting me out of my safe space somehow and see how I would react. And I think that's always the first impression of not trying to bring the best out of me, but the worst. Why would you do that at that stage in the interview? I choose not to go to the second round. Another one is obviously the very prevalent ghosting. A few years ago, for what was that? It was also quite a reputable firm. I had gone through, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 rounds of interviews already. And I've been to their offices, did some case studies, whatnot, all the dance that they wanted me to dance. And then I've never heard back from them. Nor from the recruiter. It was like, okay, cool. At least they know, right? Would be nice. Like, we don't want to be ghosted in a dating context either. But a professional one, that was even worse. But my absolute highlight was 2 years ago. No, 1.5 years ago, just before Factorial, actually. I had taken out some time where I was freelancing and not actively looking for a full-time gig or full-time role. But this recruiter was very, very persistent with me. And I interviewed with the company also several rounds. They sent me a take-home assessment that they stated on the assessment that they were expecting minimum 40 hours of work to go into that. I was lucky. I was out of work, right? Like I had spare time basically. But what do you do if you're a full-time worker in that field, especially? They don't have 40-hour weeks, I tell you. It was not remunerated, obviously. But that was not the worst part of it. The worst part was that the feedback I got after was there was an excellent take-home assessment, but the company has decided to go for a much more senior role. You were way too young for that role, and therefore you didn't really have a real chance from the get-go. And I was like, hang on a second, you made me go jump through all these holes. But worst, you reached out to me. You, the recruiter, had classified me as a suitable candidate. Where did we go wrong here? I still haven't figured out to this date. And I gave that feedback to the recruiter. They didn't want to hear it. What can I say? Numbers.
Yeah. Oh my God. The war stories, the collective amount of wasted human time on this bullshit is utterly astronomical. And I hope we can fix it somehow. Maybe with AI, I don't know.
What's your take, Tim? The whole recruiting industry? I mean, in the end, there is a lot of competition, right? And you need to show your numbers and talk to so many candidates and you have funneled so many candidates through a process. Is that helpful to the actual hiring process? Or is it kind of tainting, the experience, the actual outcomes?
I think it's just about measuring, well, back to the metrics and incentives, measuring the right things and being incentivized by it. Like I interviewed someone on this podcast a couple of months ago who runs an internal talent team, and they have one metric, which is ghosted candidates, and they want to drive it to zero. So they measure that and look at that every single day. So that's a core bit of what they do, not just bums on seats or whatever. I think maybe for external agencies, it's always going to be a little bit more ruthless and just driven by revenue and that. But like, what's the long-term impact of ghosting? Like you just recited these examples. I can remember terrible interviews I had 14 years ago of companies that I would never work for or have anything to do with ever again because they're burnt in my memory forever. So how do you quantify that? Nobody's really measuring that downside because it's kind of evaporating into thin air. But yeah, people should think about that.
I agree. I agree.
You'd touched on before the kind of McKinsey or consulting model of hiring. I'd love to hear your thoughts on like a comparison between hiring in tech, hiring in consulting. You mentioned that generally the accuracy in consulting is better, maybe because they're more consistent roles, or you need a consulting type of person. Is that why it's like there's less standard deviation in what you can get? Like, I'd love to hear your comparison.
I think if you look at these companies, you'll find that their whole people function is very mature. And for example, performance frameworks are very well executed. Like they have such rigor on what are the competencies, what are the behaviors, what are the appropriate levels of, I don't know what, right? Like they have everything figured and metriced out, if you will, which then obviously is reflected in hiring process. You can basically already targeted look at that and say, how can we find the right candidate that will perform well in this framework? I don't have that framework right now in my tech company, right? We, of course, also have some frameworks, but everything changes so fast. Context is very fluid. Challenges arise every day, change, direction, whatever. We need people who are very agile in their mindset, in their approach on facing these challenges and adapting. So I think the contexts are very, very different. There's certainly things that we can learn, I think, from these more structured approaches. And it's currently one of my to-dos or my missions to codify a little more what we're looking for, but probably less so from a hard skills point of view, but more from a soft skill attitude thing. And I think that is something that I definitely have been influenced heavily by my experience at McKinsey, both as a candidate, as then coaching candidates or hiring people by, not only looking at the task at hand and at the structure of the interview, but actually asking the question, what are they trying to test with it? Yeah. So, for example, in McKinsey, for example, you have the PEI interviews, which is the personal experience interview. And they basically give you, I think, 3 or 4 values / behaviors / whatever you want to call it. And they say, this is what we're looking for. Tell us a story in your life, or demonstrate how you have shown this behavior before. And I've had a great side job for a few years where I coached people in writing these stories and in constructing these stories, because it's not about telling a story. It's about the storytelling here. It's about figuring out how you can exactly depict the things you've done and link it to the attitudes that they're looking for. It's not this one sentence that they're looking for, right? It's like sub aspects that you can decipher, and basically tying that all together in something that in the end is round. And in the end, are they really looking for what you're saying there? Yes, of course. But I think that's only half of what they're looking for. They're actually looking for, can you do this job of transferring? And can you tell a persuasive story? Again, sales. Can you sell yourself? And I think that's something that we might be looking at to some extent, be that in the same way or similar, but figuring out whether people can, think a little bit beyond the obvious.
And it sounds like then a key to that consistent hiring at somewhere like McKinsey is that the skill they were demonstrating in that interview correlated quite closely with the skill actually needed on the job. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think so. Right? Like you're looking for some sort of quality that if you don't have the basic, or if you haven't during the preparation for the interview developed the basics of it, it's really hard to get there. In that case, it's storytelling. I think you need to have some sort of understanding of how to tie together pieces of information, and you don't want to start from scratch. But if there's something that you can build on, great. Same goes for like the case method. If you do not have any sort of logical thinking, it's going to be very, very tough for your employer, for your coach, for your mentor, for whomever to develop that, for yourself to pick it up. But if you have a basic understanding on, okay, let me break things down in order. And from there, what are the logical abstractions that we can draw in order to get closer to an answer? That will predict quite well how, in a real life context, you can abstract from the situation and just make sense of lots of chaos. So I think it's helpful to look at these like basics. Do people bring the basics, and can we develop them further?
And these basics, I guess, stick with you, and you would still be using them today in your current role, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think so. Unfortunately. No, not unfortunately. It's a great school. I think there's many positive, negative things to say about consulting. But I don't know nowadays with AI and whatever, right? But I think there is plenty of things that I have learned personally there that have carried me through the rest of my trajectory that I benefit from today. The first one is probably everything comes down to people, because you can bring the best analysis, you can bring the best charts, the best business plan, the best ideas. If you don't manage to persuade the decision makers, it was all for nothing. And I guess that is something that I have unintuitively learned at that time.
A great learning, especially in this era of AI. I don't know how that's going to change one way or another. Maybe we're going to be convincing an AI bot if that's going to be our boss in 20 years. I don't know. I hope not, but we shall see.
I don't want to think about it, to be honest. For now, let's stick to how can AI make my life easier. For example, by screening plenty of CVs, maybe taking out some biases from there, and flag where to direct my attention at the beginning. But I'm really, really curious whether at some point, probably not too far in the future, there will be some predictability powered by AI on how well will someone perform in a job. However, as with everything shit in, shit out. So I think there's still plenty of human work to be done to know what you're actually looking for, because the AI may help you with that, but the decision is with us.
Indeed it is. And as a final question today, Laura, I'm wondering if you could ask our next guest any question about hiring, what would you choose to ask them?
I think an interesting question is about managing peer-to-peer relationships. When you hire into your teams, how do you make sure that the cultural fit is not only there with you, but also with the people in your team? Especially if you're hired in a diverse way, right? And if not everyone is just like you, the question here is, how do you make sure they get along and complement each other, skill set wise, behavior wise? What happens if you promote someone pares inter pares out into a team lead role? Or also, what happens if you hire into someone's team where you don't know the team lead yet? So we basically have a vacancy in the manager role, but you already want to construct a team. I would be super curious to hear how the people deal with these dynamics.
And these certainly aren't questions we've asked any guests in the past, so always like unique new questions. And we'll ask them of a guest at some point next week, and we'll let you know what they say. Laura, it's been a great conversation today. We've covered off a lot of ground, learned a little bit about you and Factorial and your career and your life, and it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with our audience today.
Thank you so much, Tim. Really enjoy that, and I'm looking forward to the next one.